A space mission goes wrong as Earth faces destruction. The crew is sent to a far-off planet with a device to make it habitable, but they come across a mysterious force with its own agenda. In the future, a fatal virus that affects people, animals, and plants spreads over the Earth. Consequently, the amount of oxygen on the planet has drastically decreased and may soon completely vanish owing to the excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Finding a new planet will be necessary for humans to avoid Earth's destruction. Dr. Stephen Ross, a talented scientist, and his team have found two objects that are extraterrestrial in origin. Stephen claims that they have replicated the engine and the sphere, two extraterrestrial artifacts, and identified their special characteristics. The sphere is used to create life, and the engine is utilized for interstellar travel. The team has initiated the engine to locate a potential planet for terraforming into a habitable environment. Their next step is to journey to this planet and initiate the process of creating life. The team, consisting of Stephen, Peter, Leona, and David, is accompanied by skilled pilots Ryan, Richard, and Frank. Together, they will explore the test solar system, identify a suitable planet, and begin the transformation into a new Earth. On the day of launch, Stephen's girlfriend Amy attempts to catch up with him but arrives too late. As the team travels towards their destination, Peter and Stephen inspect the engine before entering a wormhole. Peter is speculating about the object's provenance and believes it to be a relic from a long-gone, sophisticated society. The sphere's body is developing cracks as this is going on. The crew then congregates in the cockpit to begin a warp drive, which will enable them to reach their objective far more quickly. They will be the first humans to explore space, the pilot Frank informs them. A Bible and a teddy bear are among the items that some crew members are holding to calm their fears as they gradually get ready to sail into the unknown. After everything is in place, the rocket ship enters the wormhole gradually, but as the system was entering, a serious fault was reported, and as a result of the voyage, every crew member passed out. After some time, the spacecraft succeeds in crossing the wormhole and arrives at the other side. When Stephen and the others awaken, they discover they are facing a blue planet. Nevertheless, they have traveled to a distant solar system, confounding them rather than arriving at test. Because of this, Stephen angrily informs Peter, who is in charge of making sure the engine is running, that he is off the job until further notice. Stephen thinks that Earth is doomed and that the mission has already failed. Though Peter is aware that he has thoroughly inspected the engine, he nonetheless obeys the captain's instructions. Much later, Stephen somberly glances at Amy's photo. He then queries the pilots about their possibility of returning to Earth. The pilots respond that they cannot go back as long as they are unsure of their current location. Observes an unknown object approaching the ship while examining the ship's systems. Actually, Peter's lifeless body drifting in space is the unidentified object. Peter entered the engine room to check on it some time ago against Stephen's orders, but he died for an unidentified reason. The crew members come to the conclusion that Peter likely took his own life due to his realization of the mistake with the engine. However, Leona is skeptical of this theory as she has known Peter for 8 years. Despite her doubts, Stephen advises her not to mourn for someone who jeopardized humanity's survival. He then examines the data presented by David about a potential Earth-like planet they are approaching. Stephen determines that they are fortunate to have discovered a planet where they can explore with only the use of breathing masks. This leads him to believe that the sphere can be utilized on this new planet as well, prompting him to instruct Ryan to prepare for the journey to the unknown blue planet. Ryan and Richard, the pilots, argue with his orders because they haven't yet explored the planet, but Stephen insists that they travel there despite the high danger. As an outcome, even if the rest of the team doesn't agree, they carry out the operation using a tiny landing ship. Richard is the only person remaining on the main ship, and his job is to lead the crew to the planet. When the crew first arrives on the planet, a powerful storm that had never existed before appears. As a result, they must adapt. They are forced to remove one of their fuel tanks in order to lessen the effect of their crash landing. Following the crash of their ship onto the rugged terrain of the planet, Stephen experiences a momentary recollection of Amy, his significant other, back on Earth. In this recollection, he bestowed upon her a piece of the sphere, serving as a symbolic gesture of his profound affection. However, upon discovering that Amy was expecting a child and actively working on a vaccine for the prevailing virus, she implored Stephen to remain with her and their unborn baby. Nonetheless, Stephen asserted his obligation to save Earth. It was at this juncture that Amy accused him of harboring a desire for personal acclaim and godlike reverence, promptly discarding the sphere fragment he had bestowed upon her. Going back to the current pilot about the whereabouts of their landing craft, Ryan queries Richard. Richard responds that while there isn't any significant damage, they don't have enough fuel to go back to the main ship. Leona enters the room and expresses her anger at not being able to find a way back. Steven, however, assures her that they want to stay on the planet. Though they are on a steep mountain with little defense against the outside world, hopeful Steven believes they can just locate a deep cave to keep the sphere and themselves safe. Then he gives the crew orders to gather the sphere and other necessary supplies. However, they are unaware that a sticky, gooey substance with an unknown source lurks beneath their flooring. The 5 crew members leave the spacecraft and proceed to the cave while carrying additional equipment and the sphere. Steven delivers a brief statement regarding their achievement in locating a new suitable planet there after completing the installation of the sphere and other necessary equipment for the mission in the cave. Leona remarks that because Peter put a lot of effort into creating the sphere, he ought to have been present to witness this. Ryan then instructs the group to head back right now, saying that their assignment is now complete. Richard calls them back to the landing craft to share his discoveries. During a usual check to see if anything was amiss, he discovered a sticky substance trickling from the walls. He also plays a video that shows Peter recording just before he passed away. In the video, Peter promised to film his inspection to demonstrate that he had made no mistakes. But as he looked at the engine, he noticed an unearthly alien monster's tentacles that attacked him out of nowhere. After that, the video clip finishes. He claims that the extraterrestrial creature is most likely from the sphere, which is why the crew members refer to it as Trojan. Richard is forewarned by Leona that the alien life form may still be present within the main ship when she comes to the conclusion that it was the one that killed Peter. However, Richard was able to track down the Trojan and discover that it had followed them to the landing ship. It also boarded the sphere during its extraction. David then presents fresh information from the cave, indicating that carbon dioxide and oxygen levels have increased, but that no newly evolved life forms have been found. Steven then gives them the order to reorganize and head back to the cave to mend the sphere, but Ryan chooses to seize control and tells Steven that he is no longer in charge and that the others should focus on their survival. Ryan responds to Leona's assertion that only Steven is capable of handling the sphere by saying that Steven has not been truthful about the monster that originates from it. They may have handled the sphere differently, and Peter might still be alive today if they had known about this. Ryan presses for the cave footage to be played, which reveals that Steven saw an abnormality earlier in the cave but chose to keep it to himself. To change the sphere's settings again, Steven invites David to return with him to the cave. When Steven explains to David that Ryan's directives are for their dying planet, David is persuaded to follow them, even though he initially disagrees. Thus, armed with firearms, the 2 scientists enter the cave and discover some greenery. They're indicating that the sphere is functioning as planned. David notices that Trojan is drawing near to them as Steven is fiddling with the sphere's settings. He advises them to go, but Steven is too obstinate to listen. Steven points his rifle at David as an outcome of David firing a few shots at the sphere in a threatening manner. They are now forced to leave the area right away since the alien is getting close to them. Once they have made their way through the dimly lit tunnel, the 2 arrive at the landing craft. Just then, Trojan, whose identity is still unknown, charges in their direction. Luckily, Steven shuts the door before anything bad happens to them. Ryan approaches the 2 at the door for defying his commands. When Steven makes fun of him in return, Ryan strikes him in the face. The alarm abruptly goes off, informing them that there has been an external breach on the ship. Leona wakes up from her slumber due to the sound of the buzzing alarm clock, awakening too late to change into her clothing. Leona cautiously makes her way along the landing ship's hallway before stepping into a sticky substance, signifying the presence of an extraterrestrial. Suddenly, she feels a hand grasp her head from behind, and it's Frank, the other pilot, who does it. He instructs her to be quiet and says the Trojan has gotten onto the ship from the lower deck. Leona is forced to leave the room when the 2 of them approach an adjacent laboratory room where the alien is present for their own safety. Frank chooses to give his life to save Leona's by shoving her out the door and shutting it entirely as she waits for him. Leona hears the terrifying sound of Frank's scream as she flees. She dashes over to where Steven and the others are on the command deck and slams the metal door shut. After that, Ryan becomes enraged with Steven for bringing the alien back to the landing craft and endangering their lives. Their cameras and communications are down, and they have no clue where Trojan is or how to transmit a distress signal back to the main ship. When Steven investigates how Trojan got inside the structure, he discovers that it did so through the walls with the thinnest metal coating. This reveals to them that the extraterrestrial is extremely intelligent. Steven then recommends that, in order to get the cameras and communications working again, they try to repair the fuse box. Ryan remarks that this is perilous, to which Steven responds that because it is his fault in the first place, he will take the chance and venture into the ship's dark and hazardous passageways. Following his successful camera patch, David calls Steven again to let him know that Trojan is getting close to his location. He survives because of this early warning because Ryan swiftly pulls him back with a rope that is fastened to himself. Steven treats him with contempt after the rescue, most likely because he still despises him despite the fact that he saved his life. Steven comes up with a strategy that would proceed like a bullfight when Leona asks what to do next. Here, they will guide Trojan outside via the main hallway before locking the doors behind it. Once outdoors, they'll try to use their engines to burn the alien beast to ashes. In this risky scheme, where Steven serves as the primary ruse, Leona and David will take turns manually opening the lab's airlocks and air door before Ryan entices him to the main corridor, and so they successfully carried out their plan. However, when Trojan is finally able to leave, the engines won't start because the alien is interfering with the system's connection. Leona quickly goes outside to shoot at the alien monster. But as the engines suddenly start, Leona gets burned and dies. Witnessing this, Steven quickly runs back to the ship through the air hatch. The alien chases him, but Steven and David are able to close the door on it. In the process, Trojan's tentacle gets cut off, and he tries to catch Steven, injuring David. Later, Steven examines the alien's tentacles in the lab to understand how they work and how they infected David, who is resting because of his wound. He realizes that the tentacles are made of the same material as the sphere. Additionally, the bacteria that infected David have a strong defense mechanism, and his blood now contains the solution to creating a vaccine for the virus on Earth. After informing David about this, Steven returns to studying the tentacle and discovers that it is a biorobot that receives messages from other aliens. He concludes that this is how the aliens colonize other planets. Ryan enters the room and asks Steven what is happening. Upon knowing that they need to return to the sphere, Ryan refuses because it would endanger lives. He locks the lab door and arrests Steven, accusing him of being self-absorbed and only seeking to be a hero. David agrees with Ryan. After their fight, Steven checks on the broken piece of the sphere that he is holding. This piece flew out when David shot at it earlier. To his surprise, he realizes that it looks exactly like the fragment he gave to Amy as a gift. He then talks to Richard to figure out their current location in space. However, this time they need to fast forward 4 billion years into the future. During this process, they discover that they have actually been on the same Earth all along, but they have traveled back in time before life began. Because of this, Steven wants to inform his girlfriend about David's infection so she can start making vaccines to save Earth. This information will be useful for her research on vaccines. In order to accomplish this, Steven writes a message on a piece of the sphere, suggesting that Amy will eventually miss him and come back for it. If Steven does this correctly, Amy will return the fragment to the sphere and fix it. If not, humanity will be destroyed. Just then, Richard delivers some devastating news to Steven. Ryan is planning to blow up the sphere. Without hesitation, Steven tells Richard to stop Ryan, and he opens the airlock. He quickly rushes to the command deck, where Ryan is getting ready to set off the explosives. Steven convinces Ryan to abandon the plan because it will lead to nothing. Suddenly, David, who is now partially infected by alien bacteria, shoots and kills Ryan with a gun. Steven attempts to persuade him that his own daughter will not exist if he continues, but David responds that at least she and other people will not suffer by not being created. He is firing at Ryan while saying that Trojan has chosen him and that humans are just malfunctioning on the sphere. Steven now grabs a nearby Rubik's Cube and tosses it to the other side, distracting David and giving Steven plenty of time to shoot David as he runs away. Following that, Steven counts down the explosives that Ryan prepared, goes outside the landing craft, and discharges a flare gun. Later on, Steven and David have a shootout in the hallway. In the meantime, Trojan shows up after being attracted by the light from the flare gun earlier. Steven manages to escape from the alien and runs down a shaft that leads to another hallway. He makes his way to the command deck, but David takes his gun. Just as David is about to shoot, the alien's tentacles pierce his chest, allowing Steven to flee. Eventually, the timer for the explosives reaches 0 and they detonate, destroying Trojan and the landing ship. After going to the cave to place the fragment there, Steven contacts Richard and asks for rescue. Inside the cave, Steven returns the fragment to the sphere, which allows him to communicate with the future where Amy is. When Amy eventually notices the fragment and the inscriptions on it, she eventually runs back to the cave containing the original sphere. Once Amy replaces the fragment, the past and the future converge, allowing the couple to see each other. Steven then acknowledges that Amy was correct about the vaccine, giving her the formula for the antigen he had discovered. After saying goodbye, communication stops and Steven eventually dies from a lack of oxygen in the cave. However, in exchange for Steven's sacrifice, Amy creates the vaccine that ultimately saves the world. The film basically teaches the audience a valuable lesson about humility and how stubbornness may have negative consequences, even if it has chosen to add complexity to the tale by inserting the time travel element. The fact that Amy's vaccination is the real answer to Earth's problems rather than leaving to find another place to live also demonstrates to us that occasionally there might be a simple solution to a problem. Thanks for watching. Take care, and by now, see you in the next video.